All right, we're going to go ahead and call our budget workshop. It's at 4 o'clock. I think we're a little out of time here, but we'll go ahead and call our budget workshop to order. Again, all the commissioners are here, and you see the agenda in front of you, and I'll be happy to accept a motion to approve the agenda as printed.
So moved.
Thank you, Jack. You heard the motion from Jack. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, like sign. That passes 5-0. Item for decision. The first item, the sheriff's salary increase for BSCO employees, presented by the sheriff. The captain's going to be here, and he's going to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Sheriff's Office is grateful for what the County Commissioners have provided to our agency. However, one of our greatest obstacles is attracting and retaining employees. The Sheriff's Office comparison of salaries revealed that although we are the largest law enforcement agency in the county, we are the lowest paid law enforcement agency in the county. Morganton Department of Public Safety, Valdez, Drexel, and Glen Alpine, as well as the North Carolina Highway Patrol, Broughton Police, and North Carolina License and Theft, and ALE are compensated much better. In some cases, over $5,000 per year better. The Sheriff's Office also has a difficult time attracting basic law enforcement training graduates from the Western Piedmont Community College, when other agencies' starting pay in and outside the county is up to $5,000 or more than the Sheriff's Office. $5,000 per year for a medium and close custody detention officer who is paid $26,875 is a significant difference. We have lost several detention officers in 7 months, 5 for better pay and 2 for retirement. At this time, we currently have 3 detention officer vacancies in our downtown jail without any applicants for those vacancies. Those vacancies account for 25% of the line officers who staff the downtown jail. Lastly, information provided to the Sheriff's Office is that some of our employees and detention officers' families are eligible for government assistance at our current salaries. Unlike other law enforcement agencies within the county, the Sheriff's Office provides a multitude of services, many of which are unique to our agencies and critical to the citizens of Burke County. Some of our services include providing road patrol and answering calls for service throughout the county, supplement calls for service in municipalities, investigate reported crimes throughout the county, transport writs, serve civil papers throughout the county, secure the county courtrooms, administer the Burke County Jail, transport inmates and involuntary commitments across the state, administer the Burke County Animal Shelter, secure the majority of the Burke County Public Schools, provide a lake patrol, partner with municipalities to provide community policing services, have a SWAT team which offers their assistance to other agencies, contribute officers to the Burke County Narcotics Task Force, maintain and monitor sex offender registries for Burke County, issue gun permits and concealed carry permits, contribute officers to the regional dive team, maintain Sheriff's Office Honor Guard, provide a K-9 unit program, provide an Explorer program for young adults interested in law enforcement, provide a DARE officer to the Burke County Public Schools, administer Project Lifesaver program for Burke County, and provide a full-time warrant officer. The Sheriff's Office is requesting an annual increase of $3,000 for all Sheriff's Office full-time employees based upon salaries, excluding the sheriff. This would raise starting salaries in the office to be competitive with most other law enforcement agencies, but still less than others. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Captain. And before I open the floor for questions, I'm going to let Brian respond with the county's response.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. You have in the proposed budget 3.5% across the board increase for all county employees. That is consistent with our pay plan and with the way we've, as far as I can remember, dealt with pay issues in the past. I can tell you that there are employees in lower pay grades that are also qualifying for food stamps, so that's not unique to any one department. I would not be supportive of what's being requested here in lieu of the fact that we have the request for 3.5% across the board, plus shifting our pay scale up to 3.5%, so that even starts out the starting pay for all positions by 3.5%. And as you may be aware, for detention officers, we are moving them up one pay classification, so that's 5%. So the 5% plus the potential 3.5% that would be effective in January would actually move the detention officers' salaries up 8.5%, if I'm doing my math right. Additionally, you're aware that we do have a merit system in effect, and it's tied to the employee's performance evaluation, and if there's any disciplinary action that can stop a person from being eligible for a merit increase, which is another means of trying to move people out on their pay scale, and I certainly understand that. But the last thing that I will just touch on is that we've had some discussion in the past that possibly our HR department in the coming budget year would need to start doing a study of pay and market study for pay for different departments. Do about a third of your departments a year. Now, some departments are bigger than others, so you may not do the same number of departments in a year, but you try to look at about a third of the total workforce in the county, and come back at the probably in the February or March time with any kind of results they get from their study and any recommendation they have for consideration and the budget that would come that spring. So that's my perspective as your county manager on this one particular item, and I just that's where I am on this.
Thank you, Brian, and I'll open the floor now up for comments or questions.
Mr. Chairman, I think in the last meeting we had, I asked, if we could get from the finance director the budget for employees' salaries and benefits from 2011-12 up through this budget. What we've had budgeted for those 2 years. Do we have it or not? We don't have it.
The comparison of 11-12 to 16-17 was provided, I don't know what day that was. It was included in an email, but I don't know what day that was. Let me find it. Monday. Yeah, it was sent out Monday. I'm gonna try to open it up real quick. But yeah, if you're looking at comparing the and on the spreadsheet that was attached in the email, hopefully everybody got that. But if you look at the general fund, just the salaries and the actual pay, not counting fringe benefits, in 16-17 is a little over $21.5 million. The fringe benefits is roughly $8.3 million for a total of $29.8 million. In 11-12, just comparing the total for the general fund, it was roughly $23.8 million. So approximately a $6 million difference between 11-12 and 16-17 for general fund only. And the overall, the enterprise funds, the totals are relatively unchanged. So basically, you don't look countywide, the overall difference countywide in salary and benefits in proposed 16-17 budget versus the adopted 11-12 budget is roughly $6 million.
Okay, thank you. I didn't get a copy. I don't know.
Other questions, comments?
Well, for the total budget, my comment is, we started out, I like to go back to 11-12. We brought in the budget. Well, I didn't bring in that, was before my time. 11-12, we had a budget of $67.5 million. And our proposed budget is 81.1, I believe, $million. if you do the math, that's over $13 million in 6 years that the budget has increased. And I suppose the one the budget put before us probably will pass. So that's actually a little over $2 million a year that the budget has increased each of those 6 years.
One of the things that I asked Brian about yesterday is part of the increase in the budget too was out of the fund balance. I believe that the senior center, Brian, of course, we built the EMS station. I believe we built that for cash rather than borrowing that money. And now you're saying the senior center. I'll let you respond to that.
Yes, sir. You've got paying cash for the senior center, and there's some other projects that we're doing with fund balance that are one-time. I believe the landfill closure, Paul, is that correct? And then there may have been one other smaller one. But over those years, and I think the 11-12 budget was my first one, and we did almost a 5% cut because we were using so much fund balance to balance, and y'all were not receptive at that time to a tax increase to balance. In those intervening years, you've had additions to staff. Some of that is in DSS. And then you'll remember last year, we added EMS employees to help with the transfers from the Valdez Hospital to the main hospital. And of course, that's paying for itself. So that's I don't know if Paul would say that's actually revenue neutral as far as its impact on the county budget, but it still shows up in the budget. But it's being funded by our agreement with the hospital. I don't remember how many other different positions we've added and some other odds and ends, but yeah, and we'll get to that part in the budget workshop about what's coming out of fund balance and what's not. But yeah, we try not to use fund balance any more than we absolutely have to, and these are pretty much one-time, non-recurring events that we're using it for in this proposed budget.
Other comments, questions?
Mr. Chairman, I just, to bring a point of awareness, every time you increase the budget $5 million, Paul, I think I'm correct, that's about 8-cent tax rate increase, is that correct?
Yeah, in the current proposed budget, the 1 cent on the tax rate brings in $630,500 approximately.
So 8's a good round number, or maybe 7.5. But, to reiterate what Jack says, you can't keep going up $5 million and expect not to raise the tax rate. And 2.6 million of this one is coming out of fund balance. I just don't think that's a healthy, responsible budget to continue to prepare a budget that's going to take money out of the fund balance, and it doesn't let your fund balance grow back to where it was.
Again, we're on item 3, which is the sheriff's salary for Burke County Sheriff's Department
Well, that
employees.
has to do with the
With the
fund
budget,
balance.
I realize.
Mr. Chairman, I have
but,
a question.
Johnny?
What did I get for $3,000? What does the average citizen get if we give you $3,000 for each of these 109 employees?
I think it just raises the ability to maintain the staff that we have, and attract some qualified applicants.
Let me ask you this. In your studies, if you have looked at the applicants that are coming to the other, and I don't want to talk about police departments. Let's try to talk about sheriff's departments so we can compare there. Is the money the attractor, or is benefits the attractor?
I haven't really asked, but I would imagine it would be both.
Which has the greater weight, money or benefits? Do you think? I'm asking you a personal opinion. and I know
Personally,
you-
me, I would look at both, because you got benefits for your family, and you also have to have an income to support that family.
Okay, the reason I'm asking this, okay, I can't go to the store with a benefits package and buy a pound of bologna. I got to have some money, okay, to buy milk, bread, and things like that. So when we look at a compensation package, And I know the benefits packages, when I worked for the state, were relatively good. I had to look at both of them. I looked at the money and I looked at the benefit packages, and I had to decide, you know, the benefits package was down the road. That's when I was going to benefit from it. That's what it was there for. It paid my health insurance, but it had a great retirement system that said, if you're willing to stay there for the money that we're going to pay you, there's some benefits on the end of it. Are we there with the sheriff's department?
I think most of the benefit packages are relatively the same as far as insurance and, you know, things that insurance and retirement. I think most of the sheriff's office will be about the same.
No more questions right now.
Other comments or questions? All right, if there's no other questions, what's the pleasure of the commission on item 1? This is a decision item.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we deny the request for the $3,000 per employee for the sheriff's department.
And I think would it be appropriate to, part of that is what Brian put into that with his,
Yes.
what do you call that, Brian? What you're going to do with the,
The salary study, market salary, I believe that's the correct term, that HR would do that in future years, about a third of the county employee staff per year, and come back with a recommendation somewhere in the February to March timeframe, if that's possible.
is that all right, Jack, to add that?
I agree with the manager, because we have a lot of other employees in this county, and it wouldn't be fair to do 100 or so and leave the other, how many, hanging out, and just with the benefits that we provide every year, the cost of living, et cetera. So I think we need to continue to look at salaries by the HR and others.
Good, thank you, Jack, for the motion. You all heard the motion. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Passes 4-1. All right, item 2 is in the MOU between the Burke County Board of Commissioners and the Burke County Board of Education regarding the new elementary school. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. You may remember we had a joint meeting with the school board, and they were talking about options they had regarding overcrowding and the building a new school. And the consensus was that we were supportive of the building a new school versus reopening a closed school. And what this is a memorandum of understanding that would be related to that has been submitted by the school superintendent in relation to the construction of a new elementary school in the city of Morganton to relieve overcrowding. They say to expedite the process, the Burke County Public Schools requested the MOU be approved by the Board of Commissioners as a June 7th meeting instead of on June 21st. They're trying to move forward as quickly as they can so they can have this school built and open as quickly as they possibly can. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the MOU. But it's basically to try to move forward with this process for the building of a new school.
Questions for Brian?
What's any other major highlights in that MOU, Brian?
I don't see any other highlights other than this, the yellow about that they wanted to move this to today's meeting if they could to get it passed so they can move forward. It's more or less that I'll do what I can to work with them and the school superintendent up to things that would require actual board action.
The MOU is in the packet.
Yeah. Johnny, did you need a copy, or do you have it?
No, I've got it.
All right.
I just wondered what Brian's thoughts were. Are you going to be actively involved with him through this process? Have they invited you?
Well, I mean, they run the show as far as the construction and all that, but there'll be some interlinking between me and them, and of course, this board. There'll be certain things you would probably have to do.
Other comments, questions?
Do they have the money to go forward with this, or?
We'll have, and I think it's referenced in the MOU, we'll have to, the county will actually have to borrow the money to construct the school. But we'll pay the amount back through the restricted resources that's dedicated for school capital.
But our school capital probably is half of what it was when we borrowed the money for the high schools, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, the debt, yeah.
Yeah.
So can you give them a little more comfort feeling about that there will be sufficient funds to cover the anticipated debt?
Yeah, I think, and we may have touched on this at an earlier meeting. I know I had this conversation with someone, but somewhat like we did with the high schools, since they've, right now we have still debt left on the two, when we built the drone in Patton High Schools. So once we issue this debt, we can structure the debt once we look and see how much money's coming in from lottery and, the sales tax and those kind of issues, to see how much money we can afford to pay for debt service annually. And so if we run into a situation where, we may be running tight, until the existing debt is paid off, which should be 2026, I believe, the first few years we can structure the debt where we pay less, in those years where we have duplicate debt service payments, and then increase it after the high school debt gets paid off. So we have options on how we can structure the debt to make it fit within the resources, the restricted resources that will be available for capital, for school capital. We can massage that numbers and make it work. So I'm not concerned about the school debt repayment.
Comments, questions?
Yeah, Wayne, Paul, you provided that with us before we, voted for them to proceed with this. But I never did get the number of, exactly how much indebtedness they still have. It'd be kind of nice to know that. But you did convince us, and that's the reason we voted to proceed. I think that with the present situation and condition, they could afford the debt for a new school. One of the things that has nothing to do with this budget item, but during that process, I hope they really look at realigning their school districts, because that's just tip of the iceberg of some of their problems.
Thank you, Maynard. Any other comments or questions? All right. If they're not, be happy to receive a motion on, there's a suggested motion in the packet.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the memorandum of understanding between the Burke County Board of Commissioners and the Burke County Board of Education regarding a new elementary school in the city of Morganton. Further authorize the county manager to execute the MOU on behalf of the board.
Thank you, Jeff. You all heard the motion. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, like sign. That passes 5-0. Thank you. All right, that takes our decision items off the table, and now we'll go into items for discussion. And the first thing is the Burke County Board of Commissioners resolution calling for the General Assembly to fully fund North Carolina Public Schools, and I believe Jeff brought this up, and I'll turn it over to Jeff on this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Occasionally, through the course of the year, we have discussions about feeling like the state puts more burden on the county from time to time, and I think we tend to agree that that's the same case with school systems. And so we've learned that some other counties have adopted resolutions asking the General Assembly to fully fund North Carolina Public Schools. I won't read all this resolution, but you should have it before you. I just wanted to bring it as a matter of information and discussion to the board as to whether or not you might want to consider a similar resolution from us.
This should be in everybody's agenda packet.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Kay, we received an email from Larry Putnam. He asked to consider one other thing in there having to do with that special needs population because of our percentage is much higher than that of the state, for consideration of inclusion if the board was interested.
And this was the text, whereas further compounding the state funding issue is the 12.5% cap that is placed on funding for exceptional children. although the percent identified may exceed this cap.
Comments on that? If not, if you all are in favor, we can add this to our June 21st meeting as a decision item, since it's not a decision item today.
Me.
Consensus, all right, to add that to our June 21st meeting as a decision item? John, you all right with that?
Yes. Yeah.
Jack? All right, we'll go ahead and add it on the June 21st meeting.
With Mr. Putman's.
Right, with the change. Thank you. All right, item 2, we're going to be back to our, and we've had a lot of discussion today already on our recommended budget. And before we get into it, Brian, I left it, when you left the last meeting and I left early, we had questions on the table that I asked everybody to hold. If you all want to bring those questions up first to Brian before he gets into his presentation. But I know there was some questions, and if you can remember those, I'll be happy to. I said we'd do those as the first thing when we had our budget meeting, so we'll proceed with that if you have some questions on the budget before Brian goes into his presentation.
I noticed in the presentation, they covered all the bases with the exception of personnel. Do we have any changes to the personnel, adding new ones or changing classification?
The changes that I can recall are 3 deputies for or I don't remember what the pay classification was for the courthouse security. And then there are, I believe, is it 10 in DSS? And I don't recall any other additions. Was there any pay, you remember?
Yeah, I think the only personnel-related things, Brian touched the new positions. There was a reclassification in the WIC program, and I believe, and of course, WIC is a 100% funded program, so the reclassifications there actually didn't cost, or didn't propose to cost any county dollars. And so I'm trying to see how many that was. Yeah, 3. There was 3 WIC employees on that reclass. And then I guess the only other was dealing with the sheriff's detention budget. And I think as was mentioned earlier, what is being proposed there is the actual detention officer position itself is being currently classified as a grade 16. We're looking to reclassify that to a 17. And there's a detention officer special assignment position that we're actually looking to do away with that and make that a deputy sheriff position. And then there's a detention officer corporal position. I think there's actually 4 of them, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure, they nodding in agreement, that will be reclassified from a grade 17 to an 18. So basically the entry point positions in the detention facility, we're bumping those up, as the county manager mentioned earlier, 1 grade, which is a 5% difference between grades. So I think those are the only personnel-related items that's in the budget. The detention officer, reclasses for the WIC program, 10 employees at DSS, and 3 deputy sheriff positions for the detention, courthouse security, which is in the detention budget.
Cooperative extension, you added one in cooperative extension?
No, well, we didn't add any positions. The cooperative extension issue, if you remember, I guess back in April, I think was the date, the Spring came to the board talking about a new funding model that the NC State was had laid out for the cooperative extension program, and that plan called for different funding percentages for the employees at co-op extension. There's one employee at co-op extension that's 100% funded by the county. All the other positions are paid by NC State, and each month NC State sends or drafts our account for the county's percentage of their salary and benefits. So under the new funding model that goes into effect next month, the percentages have increased, and so the county portion will be more. And then there was a position that I don't exactly remember what they called it, but it's Eleanor Summers' consumer science or consumer services position, that the question came up on that position, did Burke County want to have its own dedicated position as opposed to a shared position with another county? And if the county wanted its own, it was going to cost more money. So, and the board, agreed to, do its own. So that's why you see in the co-op extension budget, the large increase in personnel cost is because under the new funding model that the board agreed to, the percentages of county participation have increased. But there's no additional positions. There's no new positions being created in the budget in that regard.
Reduce any positions?
There were no positions eliminated.
How many total employees do we have now? 546. Full-time.
546 full-time.
Is she talking too loud?
No, I was
want me to yell it one
asking
more
her, I
time?
was going to sit down in case we need you. Just go ahead and sit down.
Just sit down, just stay
JR's
here,
gone,
okay.
you can be JR.
Okay, BJ.
But now, does that include the new positions, or is that
Oh,
before
no,
that?
no, that's what we currently have right now. It's 546 full-time. But that does not include what Paul just said.
Part-time?
Part-time, we have roughly 6 that are like full-time, part-time. That didn't make sense, but they have regular scheduled hours where they work like 25 hours a week or 30 hours a week or 35 hours a week. Then we also have what we call temporary part-time, and those are our folks like that work for EMS, the paramedics that fill in as needed. So we have roughly, I'd say about 100, and if you throw in poll workers with that, we've got, maybe 150 poll workers in there as well.
On the first group, are there benefits for them?
The ones that are regularly scheduled,
I think the 6 that you're talking about.
it depends on how many hours they work. If they work over 20 hours, then they have retirement. If they work over 30 hours, they have health insurance benefits. So,
And there is one other personnel thing, because when you said something, it light went off. The budget also includes increasing the part-time paramedic pool
yes.
from an existing 40 positions to additional 10 to make it 50 positions. So we're not looking at, and we've not included any additional money, for those positions, but we're just merely trying to, make the group that if somebody's out or whatever, they can call and have more people potentially available that they can, call to come into work, because you do have an issue that if you work over a certain number of hours, then you have to extend insurance coverage to those folks.
Yes, that's the Affordable Care Act, and if our part-time employees work over 30 hours a week, then over a certain time period, then we have to offer health insurance benefits to them. That's through the Affordable Care Act.
And in an effort to try to avoid that situation, because we have had a couple that
Yes, we
have
have.
tripped into that, then if we can broaden that pool, and the EMS director felt like, 10 additional positions would be the number, then obviously he's got more people that, if the ones that are, I hate to say more reliable, but, have more availability, if are bumping up against this number of hours threshold, then at least there's more people out there that may be available to be called upon, so we avoid that kind of situation, that additional cost that goes with it.
Paul, the other area was that creating the part-time pool for detention officers.
Oh, okay.
Remember that?
Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah.
Let's see if I've got that in the notes.
How many reserve deputies?
20.
20? You know how to use those, Brian?
Well, I think the rub would be, are they detention certified? If they're not detention certified, I don't know that you could place them in the jail. But as far as putting them on the road,
We use them for patrol, the courthouse, sometimes just anywhere.
You need to come to the mic.
He wants to talk to the mic.
Come sit with me,
Talk to the mic.
We use those deputies for a lot of different reasons, to fill in for shortages. We've got a couple that work primarily at the courthouse. Just wherever they've been trained to work, mostly patrol. They mostly come in and work patrol, though.
Do you utilize all of them?
The ones that have been through field training, and to get them through the field training to where they can work by themselves is a very long process. So if they've not been turned loose to work by themselves, then they ride with the deputy. They're a backup unit in a patrol car. But we want, before we turn them loose by themselves, we want them to have the same training as a regular deputy would have, so they'll know how to handle things. But they're kind of a Band-Aid. We use them for a lot of different things.
And I guess one of the things that we need to clarify is, because I was looking back at my notes, the detention budget, we budgeted 15,000 for part-time positions, but I don't know that we ever determined the number that we need in that pool of part-time positions. So I don't know. Again,
I don't think
somewhere,
that was
somewhere,
determined.
you know, in this process, we're going to have to define, you know, how big a pool that is.
The problem with the part-time detention folks will be getting them through the detention certification program. Like I say, that's a month-long process at CVCC and Western Piedmont. I don't think's doing those anymore. So you got to put them into school, and they have to. Once you hire them, they have a year. Sheriff Standards will give you a year to get them through that certification course.
But if they're certified anywhere in the state of North Carolina, they can still work with you, can't they?
As long as they have that Sheriff Standards certification, they're clear to work.
Because some of the thought was you might be able to draw from Burke Catawba guys that want to earn some extra cash.
We could.
And I don't know if there's some other surrounding counties that, that might be an option. But I think there was some discussion about maybe 10 to 15, because you don't want to get them used too much and they get in this trouble with the insurance. But you want it to be able to help you relieve the issues that you're having down there. And between that and the increases that we're talking about in the proposed budget and the carrying over the time, you know, give this a try and see if this resolves the issues that you're experiencing is what the point was in the budget and the strategy that we were using to try and resolve this problem for them.
Sir, one thing that you'll need to consider is the part-time pay for those, because I think our deputies make $10.40 an hour, and a lot of those guys come to hold that deputy certification. I think if you're going to find people to come work that job, I think just a suggestion would be maybe pay what a full-time person would make on an hourly wage.
Yeah, because it's going to have to be enough to attract them from Burke Catawba. I don't think they're going to come to work for less than they're making at Burke Catawba.
Not if they can make time and a half there if they need to. So that's just something to consider.
Other comments, questions? Maynard, did you have any? I know you had a list, and I asked you last meeting if you had any to go over. Call Brian or Paul. I don't know if you.
Oh, I forwarded them some more.
Right.
Yes, I've got a list.
Got your response back. And all right, Brian, I'll turn it over to Brian then.
Paul, let's go over, I know there's questions about
Fund balance.
the, what fund balance is being used for and what regular funds are being used for in the projects. And, you know, the idea of paying for the East Burke Library Senior Center out of cash on hand, you're not getting anything on your interest rate for your money sitting in the bank. To have to go to the LGC, pay a fee, go through all these hoops, and then get financing for it for $3 million or less, just did not seem to me to be a good use. You know, we were thinking about going to LGC for jail construction, because that is beyond what we could do out of our fund balance. And I think, and Paul, you can correct me if you need to, but we've been fairly lucky over the past few years with our budgets and maybe even having a little bit of cash left over at the end of those years. As we continue on, since the reevaluation, that will become a little tighter each year. But you also have to look forward to the expanded sales tax base, and that was going to be a part of the strategy of the East Burke Library Senior Center paying for that, as well as I think there's a deal with the sales tax and the school system we had some discussion about, and Paul is more technically knowledgeable than I am. I think, did that come out of a settlement with the school system some years ago?
Yeah, one of the past mediations settlements for the school system gives us some flexibility once the 1 cent sales tax hits a $7 million number, which, of course, you never can tell. I guess maybe things can take off. But next year, we won't hit it next year, but it looks like if we make the same kind of progress we've been making, is that in 17, 18, we may trigger that, which will give us additional monies under the formula that right now we have the ability to take 10% of the 1 cent sales tax plus an amount equal to half of any other amount dedicated to school capital, which is the lottery money. So we can take an amount from 1 cent sales tax equal to half the lottery money. So it's somewhat a complex little arrangement, but sort of bottom line is that once the 1 cent sales tax pot hits $7 million, or is anticipated to hit $7 million, then the formula changes and the county gets a larger percent, so a larger number. So, so that we hope will trigger in 17, 18 and give us some additional funds. But the sort of the tricky thing in looking at the current budget, if you look through, you'll see a new sales tax revenue that's I think it's $1,377,600. That's the pot of money that the legislature last year, when they earmarked $84.8 million, and certain counties would get a percentage of that. Well, Burke was to get 2.19%. So if you just do the math of what our percentage of the 84.8 million, and of course that's countywide, municipalities get some of that money, so we roughly get about 75% of that. So that generates the $1,377,600 sales tax revenue that in the budget I've identified as Article 44. That money has to be used to either fund economic development, public schools, or community college. So the way this budget's presented, we're using the new sales tax money to help fund the school system. So we can say this is how we spent that money. Well, what that allows us to do is free up $1.3 million of sales tax money that could possibly go to the schools. So the additional money, even though it's earmarked for the schools, it still frees up $1.3 million in other funds that would normally go to the schools. We're proposing to use that to help offset the $3 million cost of the East Burke Library Senior Center, and the difference being $1,622,400 is coming out of fund balance. So as Brian was talking about earlier, the fund balance appropriated number that is showing up in your recommended budget, there's actually 3 different fund balance amounts, one for the health department, one for identified as fire marshal, and one as just regular or other. Well, there's 3 things funded out of the large other pot. We've got the $1,622,400 for the balance of the Library Senior Center. There's an $860,000 transfer to the Solid Waste Fund to pay for the closure of the landfill, and a $200,000 transfer to Water and Sewer to pay for a system study. Now, one thing I want to point out is that we're saying that's the numbers, but what in actuality we will do is when we know what the fund balance numbers for the Water and Sewer Fund and the Solid Waste Fund actually ends up being, because right now we can just speculate what that amount is. But if by some chance their fund balance has some money available to help offset those costs, we're not just going to transfer those dollar amounts and set in stone. I mean, if there's some money available that will help us mitigate, the amount of general fund transfer, then we're going to do that, because as much as possible, those enterprise funds should pay for their own expenses. So right now, we're anticipating worst-case scenario, the general fund will pay for those two items. So if you look at those three things, those, should be one-time cost, shouldn't reoccur. And then, like I said, the other two categories are small. The fire marshal's budget, if you remember some time back, the fire marshal came to the board. He was getting some money on an EMPG grant, and the board agreed that he could take any excess from his additional work in those grant areas that generates him more money. He would be able to take those funds, we'd set it aside, roll it over from year to year to purchase emergency equipment and expenses that may not normally get funded in the budget, but there would be a pot of money available that he could work with. Well, in talking to the fire marshal, one of the items in his budget is a $25,000 Zodiac boat that he feels is very important, but in talking with him, he agreed to fund half the cost of that out of his rollover money. So that's why you see that as a separate item, $12,500. Then the other item, there's Health Department. They have 3 programs that we're using monies that they get that are restricted to the certain programs that generate the funds. We're using some of that money to fill the gap between their projected revenues and their expenditures. You've got $13,952 going into the Pregnancy Care Management Services budget, $14,502 for the care coordination for children, and then in the relatively new program of the Blue Ridge Healthcare Collaborative, the diabetes clinic at Valdez Hospital, that this year the board agreed to, we funded it for 6 months. Rebecca came back, the board agreed to continue it for another 6 months. So now this is, the next year of that program, and there's a United Way grant that the health department was receiving that had a little bit unspent funds left in, and the United Way has, allowed them to use that money toward this diabetes clinic. So there's about $12,000 left in that pot of money that is going to fund the diabetes clinic. So those are, when you look at the fund balance section, you'll see those three categories, and those are the items that are in the budget, that uses that fund balance. So I'm not sure if there's any questions, but that's sort of where we are in fund balance.
Paul, when we look at fund balance, and we're increasing the budget, like it's been said today, by X amount of dollars every year, are we in any danger 3 or 4 years down the road that we're going to get that fund balance so low if we keep on the present track of raising our budget by $4 or $5 million or whatever? I mean, when you look at revenues sort of being flat or whatever.
Well, I guess really at this point in time, the only danger I would say is if for some reason down the road, something were to happen and, you'd reduce the tax rate or revenues just took a tumble and you didn't offset that with some expenditure reductions, then, you could easily spend down the fund balance. But last year, our fund balance in general fund was about roughly 18%.
Good.
And if you look at it and we should add a little bit to it this year, but if you just look at it in terms of $80 million, if you spend $80 million, because fund balance is a percentage of what your expenditures are. So if each 1% would be, $800,000 as a percent. So you're using, or proposed to use 2.7 million total fund balance across the board. Well, that's roughly 3%. So, if you went from 18 down 3%, you'd be at 15. So you're still, you're not in the category that some of our other comparable counties are, because they're, above 20.
Right.
But we're certainly not down to, where we've got to worry about the LGC's 8%, and you're going to get a letter, saying, hey, we see you're going down. We need to, you need to look at that.
Well, the 18%, I believe, is about as healthy as we've been in the last
Yeah.
good many years. I
Yeah.
I think that's.
And that's not recurring money coming out of the fund balance either.
Right.
That's just a one-shot deal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, because the landfill, and I talked to Keith, not Keith, but Chris, because when he brought that in, the budget was structured differently. And when I saw that, I said, oh, God, there's just no way. And we talked to him, he checked with some people at the state, and the people at the state said, well, I think his words were something like, I'm not gonna send you anything in writing, but for me personally, I don't have a problem with it. But if the regulatory people in Raleigh come out and find out, we've given you extensions to get this closed and you hadn't done it, it's probably not gonna be a happy experience with the regulators. I was not willing to gamble another year putting this closing off. We need to go ahead and get it knocked out. You've got the Library Senior Center is a one-time event. This is something we've been working on for a number of years. You're funding the school system very well, I think. I mean, they may have some different thoughts about it, but I think we are certainly doing well, in my opinion, by what we're doing for the school system, for the community college. You know, they're one of the main partners we have in trying to help with the recruitment of industry and be able to train industry to build their workforce. You're addressing a financial issue for employees with a 3.5% across the board. Plus, from my understanding, your pay plan has not really had any significant changes to it since 2008. So it's going to bump starting pay on our pay scale up 3.5%. That helps with recruitment. We had a bump up in the cost for health insurance of about 10%. And you remember me talking with Seth at BDI meeting, Valdez health insurance is going up 48%. For us to be at 10%, and that's the first increase of any notice that I can remember in 3-4 years.
Well, we had a 6% increase a couple of years ago, maybe, Rhonda? I can't
Yeah,
remember.
I think it was about 2 years ago, it was a 6%
Yeah.
increase
Yeah,
then.
but that's the first one in several years. So, yeah, and if you look back over probably the last 5 years, you know, compared what we've experienced compared to what others experienced, you know, our health insurance has done fairly well.
Yeah. And you're still, I think, in a pretty good budget. The revenues have had some moderate increases, not tremendous, but our philosophy in trying to improve services and where we can cut costs is what prevails. And you know, we're looking at adding some to fund balance this year. I'm not sure if Paul has any crystal ball to tell us anything, but it's still, that shows that we're still coming in under budget. And we will continue to try to manage that and make sure that that's always our philosophy. So it's, again, we're taking care of one-time events that will not recur, and we're not using this for things that we know are going to be a cost next year, and we're just not dealing with it. I think we are doing a pretty good job. I'm pleased with the strategies of the budget and what we're trying to accomplish, and I hope that is consistent with at least the overall goals and of the board to do that and ensure that we adequately provide services.
And I guess I would just ask the commissioners, is there anything that would prevent you, that maybe Brian or Paul could answer now, that would prevent you from voting for this budget? I mean, we just need to be as honest as we can about this budget, and it is what it is. And I think they worked hard on the budget. I think, you know, you could always do some other things, but I mean, it is what it is, and it provides for, I think, everything in county government that we should be providing for, so. But
Mr. Chairman, just a question to Paul about the fund balance again. Paul, several years ago, we were 18 million in fund balance. What are we today?
Well, I can't tell you what we are today, but I would just sort of ballpark it that if you looked at it from the standpoint that we were at 18 point some odd % before. So if you took, I can't remember what the budget number was for. if we had a $76 million budget, which is roughly what, that's been in the past. That number don't look right. 10, 20, so.
Would that be on the audit that's online?
Probably, because I don't think I've got it on me. Yeah, so you're looking at about a $14 million cash balance.
Okay, we got down to between 7 and 8 several years ago.
I'm trying to think, I can't remember what the lowest it got on me, because it's been several years since we've gotten a letter of concern from the Local Government Commission. But I think the year before, we may have been at 14, something like that. I don't know, Shirley, do you have that? No, the LGC formula thing. No, the LGC page. Did you bring that with you? Yeah. Actually, and just, we pulled some numbers off the Local Government Commission website. Our fund balance percentage from 2011 to 2015 has fluctuated, but it's been as low as 14%, and of course, this past year was a high at 18.4. So over the last 5 years, we've been relatively, settled.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you asked the question, and I'll repeat, I don't think it's healthy for us to do a budget that we spend more than we take in. And I think looking at 5 million increase a year, you do that 3 or 4 years and look what you're doing to the taxpayers. And I would feel different if I didn't think it could be different, but it can be different. It can be less.
Thank you, Maynard. Any other comments, questions?
Well, you mentioned reval. When were we scheduled for a reval?
The last reval was in 13-14, and from talking to Danny, there's not been any significant changes in values, so we may go another couple of years before we do revaluation again.
Postponed that a while back, didn't we?
Yeah.
We might well, you better consider that because the economy in Burke County is not good. I say that because if you look around the housing market, you don't see any buildings going up, and you can barely, a lot of people are taking a loss on their house to get rid of it now, so. And then job creation, well, mostly in retail, restaurants, low-paid jobs like that. So when it comes to reval time, I hope the economy is better what it is because we might get a surprise. Do a reval because it might not be as good as we hoped it would be.
Excuse me. So when's the deadline on, what's the last year we got on reval where we have to do it?
You have to do it each 8 years.
8 years.
Yeah, and so 17 would have been 4 years because we've always tried to do a 4-year reval and we've never accomplished that. So it always ends up being a 6-year cycle, and so I think that's probably what Danny is looking at this year, is doing it in 19, which would be a 6-year. But yeah, you'd have to do it every 8 years.
Excuse me. Other questions, comments? You got the guys here to answer the questions. Don't take them home and forget about them.
Not talking about taking the staff home, right?
If they need to, if they need to. We want to get a budget passed.
And just so I guess there's some clarification, because I think everybody around here has got to, know how the, actual pay plan thing's gonna work. What we're proposing is that, as Brian mentioned, there's not been, well, we've done a few odd and end things over the years, maybe as far as where grades, certain positions are classified, but as far as an overall, look at the entire, county operation and adjusting the starting pay, I think as you've probably seen from time to time, and most recently with the Sheriff's Department, it always comes up to an issue of, what the starting pay for jobs are. And of course, the pay plan, you have a minimum pay, a midpoint, and a maximum pay. So, you have a range. And, typically what happens is starting pay is supposed to be designed for the people who just come in, maybe not, they don't have all the experience, all the knowledge, there's a learning curve. And so those people start at the minimum. Well, the concept is, midpoint is supposed to be more indicative of somebody who knows how to do the job, what they would command. So, our problem's always been in the past been, when we go through these pay plan things, which I'm sure, Wayne, Maynard, and, Jack, y'all remember some of the past plans, first thing that always gets done is, you adjust your pay plan, get all the alignment and all the positions in place, and set what the pay ranges are. And then the second point of that is, you have to come up with a mechanism to move people out toward midpoint, because again, midpoint is supposed to indicate these people know how to do their jobs. Well, typically what happens is, you always pay to do that first step and get the pay plan, in the right place. But it's always more difficult to, continue funding, an amount that will take people out toward midpoint. So fortunately, what we've been able to do in the last 4 years is that, when we've gotten the pay increases, we've moved the folks out on the pay scale. So instead of having all this compression, everybody's down at the beginning of the pay range, and you run into situations where people have been here 2 or 3 years. If you don't have any mechanism to give them an increase, you hire somebody else, they're going to be making the same thing that people's been here for several years have been. So you have that compression issue. Well, we've taken the pay increases that the board has provided over the last 4 years, been able to move them out on their pay range some. And I know this is one of the questions that Mr. Taylor had sent last night, one of his questions about, the pay increases of the last 6 years. And so I've looked at that, and there were several years where we didn't do anything back in the early on, but the last 4 years, we've done 2% the last couple of years, 2.5 the year before, and 1.2 prior to that. So if you look at that combined total, which is 7.7%, then what we're saying is, if you've been here during that period of time, you've been able to move out on your range 7.7%. So, you're not, if you were just hired, 4 years ago at starting pay, you're now, with the exception of the merit performance system that's in place, but those people are 7.7% out on their pay range. Well, when you look at the pay range, that's not very far out, so, especially considering the fact that somebody could come in and if you start them off a couple percent more, they're right, you're right back together. But the concept with this one is that we're going to change the overall, pay scale. So, if you look at what a grade 16 is right now, in January, if we go forward with the budget as it is, the starting pay, the midpoint and the maximum will be increased 3.5%. So, and in order for the employees not to lose any ground on, the progress that they made out on the range these past 4 years, then they get the 3.5%, that goes along with it. So, so as opposed to what we've done in past years where it's just been, a cost of living that's, got some separation on the pay range, we're taking this is that they're going to stay in the same position on their pay range, but to do that, they're getting the 3.5% adjustment from the plan. So this helps address, the issues of, well, starting pay is X, at least in January, starting pay will be X plus 3.5%. So, it's not going to cure everything, but still, it helps address some issues like the sheriff's got and others as far as, well, what can you offer to attract somebody to come to work for Burke County?
Yeah, there again, but the cost of living, I don't, look back to the last couple of years, I think it's averaged out about two, something like that, and 3.5. What's the cost of that?
Well,
If you take that cost and give the people a pay increase, you could cut out the COLAs in the future, and they would have a decent salary.
and that's what we're, you know, like I said, we're trying to address with this, with a pay plan adjustment is, you know, we're adjusting that pay, and they're gonna, you know, the employees now that are, you know, like I said, 7.7% on the pay range, you know, when we bump the pay range up, then to keep them 7.7% on the pay range, you know, they would get the benefit of the of the 3.5%. So, you know, it's, you know, I know a lot of people use terminology of, well, it's the cost of living, you know, it's, and I mean, if you're getting the 3.5, you can call it whatever you want to. I mean, you just know you got a 3.5% pay raise. But, you know, as an employer, what, you know, I think we're looking at is that, you know, we're trying to, you know, change the pay scale. So when we try to, when we post jobs and try to attract people, you know, we're offering, you know, a competitive, you know, wage with what other people are doing. Because, like, you know, I think was mentioned, but, you know, other counties, when they go through and every 3 years, you know, do a market study of all the jobs they've got, well, they're changing their pay scale. So, you know, they're, you know, those starting pay on the surrounding jurisdictions, you know, they're going up. But if all we're doing is giving a cost of living and not changing the underlying pay plan, you know, we're gradually just, you know, becoming non-competitive.
So that's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah.
If you give them a cost of living every year, that's a pay raise.
Yeah, I mean, that's a raise.
In their pocket.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
So if you do away with that and increase the salary range, you do away with that.
Are our salaries are we keeping up with CPI?
the last few years we have been, yeah.
But we were behind.
Oh, yeah,
And we haven't caught up.
yeah. I mean, I think there was a 3-year period there, you know, that we weren't able to do anything.
It was 9, 10, and 11.
Yeah.
And then, gosh, we rifted positions in 11. Yeah.
Well, excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Go ahead. You know, that's about where I perceived that it would be. If you take a $30,000 a year salary at 7.7, it's $7,700 every 10. So 37, 21, 22 people are making about $2,200 a year more in that category. Of course, if you make more money, you make much more, you make more than that on it. But it places most of your employees with somewhere around $22,000 to $3,000 more a year in the past 4 years. And that was the point of the question.
Yeah,
What kind of impact did we really have as we implemented those increases?
Yeah, I mean, it is, because you're really talking about two different groups here. You're talking about the people that are here and, you know, they would have gotten, you know, a 7.7% increase. But then you look and say, well, okay, well, as jobs come open, you know, you have to fill
They
them.
got the increase, yeah.
Yeah, so the people that are here have received an increase. But then again, when they leave and you try to hire somebody, then, you know, you're at a disadvantage if, you know, you haven't adjusted your pay scale to reflect market condition, and, you know, you're trying to hire people, you know, at a much lower pay than, you know, other jurisdictions, you know, may offer. So, and since we haven't really addressed the pay scale and what the starting pay on most of the jobs are in 8 years, then, you know, we got some catching up to do. But, and of course, you can't fix everything at one time, but I think that's the concept, is if we can, you know, sort of update the pay plan that we've got, so the, you know, and then individuals that are here, you know, maintain, you know, the progress they've made on their grade, then going forward, you know, we can go through and do, you know, a multi-year examination of market rate and sort of keep things up to date, as opposed to every 8 years or 10 years come back and say, well, we need to do something wholesale, change everything, or do a pay study and fix everything at one time. because that's always been the hardest thing for, people to deal with is, go out and do a pay study and see this big price tag that, all of a sudden you're hit with when, you haven't done it along the way, so.
But that's going to take like at least a 3-year study,
Yeah.
like some departments 1 year
Right.
and whatever. I mean, we can't do it all at once.
Yeah, and Ron and Brian and I have talked, and I sort of kid about the fact that, well, this, if you go down that 3-year, look, the department's gonna clamor, they're gonna wanna be in year 1, because it's like, well, that sounds good, make sure I'm in year 1.
one.
I wanna be in the first batch, so,
They don't want to be in year
yeah,
three.
they don't say, no, so.
Other comments, questions? It's getting 6 o'clock here.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
I think we missed the 5 o'clock, Jack.
That's fine.
Any other comments, questions?
I move we adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
All right, you've heard the motion from Jeff. All those in favor, please raise your right hand and let's get up and go home.